Good afternoon and welcome to another TABS webinar, the third annual TABS Analytic Beauty Study. I'm Dustin Dupas with TABS Analytics and I'll be today's moderator. In today's webinar, we'll break down the findings of the study, which cover both cosmetics and skincare, including what types of beauty products consumers are buying, where those products are purchased, what social media channels are influencing beauty consumers, how much consumers buy, and how often. The speakers will also touch on various topics such as shopping channels, demographics, and shopping frequency trends. There'll be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation where you could submit questions in the box at the lower right-hand side of your screen. Also, we'll be posting this webinar to our webinar portal by tomorrow afternoon. That portal can be accessed by going to webinars.tabsanalytics.com. Our speakers for today's webinar are TABS Analytics CEO and founder Dr. Kurt Jetta and Andrea Van Dam, who is the CEO of Women's Marketing. Dr. Jetta founded TABS Analytics in 1998 and is also the director of the research unit of the Economics of Consumer Marketing, which is part of the Center for International Policy at Fordham University. He is a frequent contributor to industry publications and symposiums. Ms. Van Dam has been with Women's Marketing for 18 years, rising to CEO in 2014 due to her unrivaled knowledge of emerging and established brands and her customer-centric vision. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Thank you, Dustin, and thanks everyone for attending today, our third annual beauty webinar, and a particular thank you to Andrea and the team at Women's Marketing. We actually share quite a few clients, and the first time I had some interaction or was made aware of Women's Marketing, we had been tasked with measuring the effectiveness of a mutual client of ours. I believe it was Fission's Formula back about 10 years ago. And I mean, not only did the advertising that they created worked, I mean, it was pretty much about the best impact that we had ever seen or measured, and it was in print, no less, if memory serves. So since that time, they've been doing a lot of great work, and it's a pleasure to have them join us. So today we're going to go through the survey of 1,000 women 18 to 75. That's typically how we do our industry studies, and we'll talk thoroughly about how that corroborates with other data sources we know to be true. And then just a side note down here, if you want to follow a live feed on Twitter, it's TABS WMI Beauty 2016. There's going to be a live feed on Twitter of all the various aspects of this webinar. So when we define beauty here, last year and the first 2 years we only did color cosmetics. We've added skincare, and it's important to remember because there's always this natural bias that skincare equals face. Remember, there's body lotion too, so that's over the overall umbrella of skincare. And based on the traditional definition of beauty, if you include fragrance and you know, a couple other categories, this is, I believe, about 70% of that universe. So it's quite a big chunk now. We ask about the product types purchased. There were 20 specific cosmetic types, 12 skin types, and then what types they purchase regularly, meaning 3 or more times. Where do they buy and buy regularly? What brands are they aware of? And we asked about over 30 brands for each category. And then importantly, favorability, purchase, and regular purchase. And what we have found over the years is they are highly predictive of future sales and performance. And in fact, if you went back to our webinar a couple of years ago, you'd see some of those emerging brands that have since that time broken out and gone public and, you know, made quite a bit of money and quite a splash in the market. And then finally, we finish it up with attitudes towards cosmetics specifically, because that's where we have the trending, and I mean, it was broader on beauty, but primarily cosmetics, and then social media. And as I mentioned, we do a lot of validity checks, and I'm going to go through, as I talk about the data, talk about where we see things in market that we can corroborate. So for example, when we say Ulta, for example, as last year we said it's on fire and it's, you know, growing huge numbers. Well, in fact, that's in fact what happened. They had some really strong quarterly earnings reports where their sales were up, say, 15%. So it has been known to be, and quite often is, an early indicator of trends that are really going to come out on the market. And as I mentioned, it's the question of who buys, what do they buy, where do they buy, why do they buy? I mean, that's the blocking and tackling. Every single brand manager, every single person in a sales and marketing function should be able to answer about your brand. And so the information that we have within this survey, we won't cover nearly, just a fraction of it, but we do have that data, and we can pretty much answer all of those questions about your particular brands or most of your brands. And then we look at year-over-year trends and behavior. So we won't have that trending for skincare because this is the first year, but we certainly will have it for cosmetics. And if you want to access any of the webinars, you can find them at webinars.tabsanalytics.com. You'll hear us talk about buyer groups, or what is a light or a medium or a heavy buyer, and we're defining it by the number of types that they report that they purchase at least once during the year. So recall in cosmetics we had 20 different types we were asking about. If they purchase at least half of them, they're considered a heavy buyer. And then for skincare types, if they purchase half of the 12, they're considered a heavy buyer. And each of those are roughly 20 to 25% of the buyer base, but much higher percentage of the volume base, well over 50%. So let's get into the data. Let's talk about cosmetics. And so before I start talking about specific types or anything, let me just give you the lay of the land, what we're looking at. So we are looking at the 4 segments of cosmetics: eye, face, nail, and lip, and then the key types within each of those segments. The blue lines are the trends in penetration over the last 3 years we've done this study. So for example, mascara has gone from 61 to 66, now to 68 as far as penetration. And then regular purchasing, which again we're defining as 3 or more times a year, is in orange. So that's how we read this, and we get a good sense of momentum and trends, etc. Let me give you the macro conclusion first of all. So this is interesting. So the average number of types that they buy is growing and growing meaningfully. That's actually quite a big jump, 6.4 to 6.9. But what's also interesting is the number of types entering into some kind of regular regimen has not grown. So, and we're going to see this throughout the study. Women love to engage with this category, try things in the category, purchase things, but it really, the fight then comes down to what products, types, what brands get into their regular purchase routine. So the winners, who's gained? Well, mascara is on fire. I mean, it's always been the highest among all the types as far as penetration, but you really see that regular purchasing, despite the overall trend is flat in the regular purchase rates, they're the ones capturing the biggest gains in regular purchasing. And so you can go across and see eye in general is doing very well as far as purchasing, but as I keep going across, I see a lot of the orange being flat, and that's that kind of overall trend that we see. We also see that we've had a lot of year-over-year gains in face. But now what's declining? Well, we see nail, and 2 years ago, that was the big thing in the trade publications. Nail is hot. Retailers were expanding their assortment and kind of offering a whole bunch of different brands, and there was a lot of new trial. But based on what we're seeing on the regular purchasing, a lot of those new users, the category really didn't gain the traction among those new users, and consequently, both in a macro, in a data-driven sense, so what we can read in the market as well as corroborated through our research, shows some pretty substantial declines. Now, if you're a particular nail care vendor, don't get too freaked out by the magnitude of the declines, because what we did, and this is kind of an anomaly with the research, survey research, that it tends to pick up trends and accentuate them. In the real world, there's definitely a trend or a movement in that same direction, but not nearly as much. And so that Ulta example I just gave earlier was a perfect example. Our data showed that they had grown like 30% in buyer base, but the same store sales came out when they reported was about 15%. So that's the phenomenon we're looking at. And so we also see what percent don't purchase, so the overall level of engagement has gone up. The number of women in the category went from 86 down to 90, which is pretty good. So this is really a category that is up quite a bit. Um, it is not, it is decelerated somewhat. So when you have a category that kind of continues to accelerate, you would expect to see some real strong, growth as well in the regular purchasing, which we haven't seen, but that's not to say it's still, a very healthy, very strong category. So who's buying them? Well, here we have the vaunted millennials. So you may have heard me talk about before about how overrated millennials are. Well, if there any marketer that wants to get into the mind of millennials, they really have to look no further than beauty. I mean, this is the bellwether category on understanding their importance to a particular category, how they engage with the category, how they get their information, all types of things that Andrea will actually talk about in more detail as we go along. There's this interesting blogger that I follow quite a bit, the Ad Contrarian, and he, was always talking about the same thing, how millennials now are no different than the millennials of the past. People are always obsessed with youth. And I think he's 80% right, but he's a bit too reductionist on his evaluation, because the big difference on millennials now versus, say, the younger age target back in the, say 20 years ago, is the way they gain information. It's that whole technology aspect. Now, the reason why they tend to be very overrated, though, is there are just very, very few categories where they account for, the bulk of the volume or this meaningfully high skew. So that's why, there's quite a bit of ways to go in most categories on kind of getting in touch with the millennials, but here's, a great test mark and a great way to learn. Another area that kind of goes hand in hand, because Hispanics skew younger, but there's even a sharper increase among heavy buying among Hispanics, and that a lot of that is brand driven. There's quite a few brands that have been really seen an upsurge, multiculturally positioned brand. And then with respect to income, we saw a reemergence of this pattern we saw 2 years ago, that the highest purchasing was done among actually these upscale but not totally affluent users. And what we're looking at here is what percent of this particular group are heavy buyers. So when we talk about millennials, it was 44% of all the millennials were heavy buyers compared, and you see kind of consistently down among all these other age groups. And so here's the peak at the 75 to 100 grand, then it kind of tends to go down. Now, a lot of that is age driven. So, older consumers, before they retire tend to be higher income. So there's a lot of that covariance going on. But, the big driver is age and Hispanic to really understanding this category. As I mentioned, we also talk about brands, and so the way we break it down is there's 4 groups. There's mass legacy, the brands that are in mass market that have been around a while, the mass niche, the brands that are primarily in mass market but are relatively new and growing, and similarly we look at it on the specialty channels, legacy and niche. So all the legacy brands, if you look on the aggregate, they are pretty stable as far as the level of awareness, not a whole lot of growth, although they haven't declined either. But just look at how many brands are really in the minds of women. I mean, women are very aware of all the offerings and the different brands that they have availability to, but it's these niche brands that have really just come up, and you can see it from this bar right here, the growth year over year. I mean, they still haven't broken into, at least most of them have not broken into what we would consider mainstream awareness, which we generally put it at 80%. Here we kind of set the bar a little bit lower at 79. But brands in the mass market like Elf, like NYX or Milani, I mean, those were all brands that have been making these major gains and really have continued to explode into the market. And many of those have this multicultural appeal as well as a strong skew toward the younger consumers. If we look at where they're buying, so this is what we call a share of mention. So what we're doing is weighting their reported purchasing at least once at an outlet, and they're purchasing at least 3 times at an outlet. And the big story here is not that Sephora and Ulta are growing, it's that Walmart has reasserted their presence in beauty. In fact, they've grown a lot. And remember, when I say they've grown a lot, it's not just based on the study. We've gone back and validated that and corroborated that. And what they did can be directly attributed to the actions that they made based on some of those emerging brands. They really made the a pretty strong commitment to brands like Milani and Elf, and I believe Essie was part of that mix. Now that's not to say they hurt the legacy brands, because from our review they didn't. But you kind of forget that Walmart isn't beauty at all, and they really do have this ability when they set their mind to it. They really can push some pretty significant growth and volume. Who else is up and down? Well, Sephora is gaining primarily as a function of the Sephoras that are within JCPenney, and this is the first time we've broken that out, so we don't have a strong trending, but we do know they've been growing their stores. The decliners, Target, we've been reading probably, most of you have been reading about the struggles they've been having on store traffic, and so we see some declines there. CVS also have been having some front-end struggles that they haven't fully recovered from when they got rid of cigarettes. But the bigger issue is the declines in department stores. So now we saw a fairly significant uptick in department stores last year, a lot of it brand driven, but now across the board there's these declines. And so it's the chicken or the egg. Is cosmetics in department stores down because department stores are weak, or are department stores weak because something about the way this major traffic driving category is being handled? And I'll have something to say about that later on, but just a little tease there. Because it's really kind of a key issue. So we asked for the first time this year about skincare, and here's the penetration and regular purchasing on all the various types of skincare. And just like cosmetics, it's actively purchased across a lot of these different types. And I'd like to really comment on some of the penetration buying rates. I'd like to have more comment on the penetration buying rates, but I'll be quite honest, I got nothing. I mean, I just, it's first year, we'll trend it. I mean, what do you want from me? I can't be a genius on everything here, for crying out loud. So let's keep going then. So who's buying it? And you see that, yeah, it's very similar, but not quite as accentuated on the demographic profile of cosmetics. So there tend to be less heavy buyers are coming from the younger age group, the 18 to 34, less of a skew toward Hispanics. You see 30%, and it was in the 40s, but certainly there is a skew there. We do see that effect of the skew toward that upscale but not totally affluent demographic. So it's kind of a as far as understanding the demographics, it's cosmetics light, let's put it. And we also have this interesting dynamic. Now, there just seems to be many more mass market brands available. And you do see, as we look at some of the market data, I mean, there's a pretty big difference in dynamics between face care and body lotion and body care. Body care tends to be very much more mass market, lower price type, less indulgent for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of new emerging brands that are kind of breaking that through. And the two of the big ones, really Olay and Neutrogena, as well as Aveeno, have really kind of come on board. Now, we also have purchasing and regular purchasing, but we don't have it in this study, just too much information to cover. But of course, if you want to engage after this call, then we're more than happy to talk about your particular brands. But here you see a pretty big difference in the favorability, although the awareness is all the same. I mean, and we've been able to correlate in the past how favorability does translate into better sales productivity. So if they're not highly favorable, that doesn't mean they're unfavorable. What this often tends, if I have a low score in some of these, that tends to mean maybe consumers are a bit neutral toward your brands. And so that's something that your brand, you would want to try and affect and move the needle forward a bit. So you see there's not a whole lot of brands on this list that even have low awareness, and there is that correlation between the more they know you and try you, the more they like you. So there's a lot of good products out there that women are trying. And here's the number of different brands that they're purchasing. So they're purchasing on average 6. That's a very high number. That number on cosmetics was much higher. I believe it was like 9 or something. I mean, really high numbers. So they're not only knowing about a lot of different brands, they're purchasing a lot of different brands. So we see that skincare is much more mass market oriented. Not, well, actually, I'm overstating much. They are more mass market oriented. So this number is 58% for skin, and this is percent of transactions. So share of mentions correlates highly to percent of transactions. And that number for cosmetics was 52. Now, this will be higher if we look at it on a dollar basis because we know that specialty brands do better and have higher premiums in this, than mass market. One of the things I forgot to mention on cosmetics, so I'll make a note here, online was actually returned to growth. So we had done quite a few industry studies that showed online actually dipped. So not only cosmetics last year, but it was grocery and vitamins. This year it's returned to growth. It's about 9% of transactions in both skin and cosmetics. So that places it roughly 10% of the market. So that's a meaningful contribution. And those of you that followed my grocery webinar last month know that I just absolutely was big time down on online grocery, but also said, hey, there are some segments and categories that do very well online. This is one of them. And in fact, this online within specialty is the only specialty outlet that actually held their share between the two categories. All the others were lower development in skincare than they were in cosmetics, but still the players, the relative sizes stayed the same. Ulta is still a big player, Sephora, etc. Then we ask about beauty attitudes. So we've asked it for 3 years. We're just looking at 2 years worth of data and just kind of trying to get into buyers' heads. And we asked them which of these do they agree strongly with. Well, I mean, you can be all exotic and engaging as you want with your brands, but it's still the good deals that are driving the primary preference. And as we'll see, that's even true among heavy buyers. But you see over half say they like to go to stores that have good deals. But really the story of this category relative to any other category we've tracked is the level of engagement that the shoppers communicate about this. So there's less brand loyalty as we see they have agreeing that they have 1 or 2 brands they like to go between. They like to really spend a lot of time in front of that set, and this is also a way they indulge. And so that's the stat we use to explain why there's not that continued high skew to the most affluent. We see this, the women that are making, good money but not great money, is they step up and buy the expensive makeup to, for an indulgent experience. And so that's about 1/3 of overall. And then you see a lot of other things on, or natural and organic. So this is 27%. And if the election this past week taught us anything, it's, as marketers, it's that we need to get out of our bubble a little bit and understand the mass market and what constitutes a mass market opportunity as well as a solid niche opportunity. And I would put, and now that said, I would put natural and organics as that solid niche, but this is a much higher level of engagement and involvement than pretty much any other CPG category we've looked at. We just did grocery, that number was 10. That wasn't produce, of course. I think if we had ever done produce, which we did like 5-6 years ago, that was in the 40s. But so this is, this is not mass market levels, but that's a pretty strong niche opportunity, is natural and organic. And so it's something that you can't really ignore in this category, but it's also something you have to be balanced at. Is this breakthrough mass market, I'm going to, take over the world opportunity? Probably not. I mean, that's our assessment as far as a mass market. That's not to say in specialty it doesn't do very well, because we know that it does. The one thing that really kind of also stood out to us, and I've always been down on beauty advisors, just never saw how the economics work, and that's not a high number anyway, and it dropped precipitously. So think about what's happening now is that women love to engage directly with the products on the shelf, and beauty advisors in some of the department stores really are a barrier to that. So women have to kind of go through this conduit. Now, there's other outlets that may do it right and do a better job of it, and I'm sure Andrea has more expertise on that. In fact,
Yes.
help me out here, Andrea.
Anytime, Kurt. Happy to be here. So, just a few things to to say on the slide. So we've seen as well that deals and coupons are continually important to the mass market beauty buyer, who tends to be 35 plus. So we're definitely in agreement with you on that. However, I'm going to bring up the millennials quite a bit during this conversation, so we'll have to do it here. But the millennial buyer's sheer love for playing with makeup and the experience that it gives her truly trumps a deal. She's willing, frankly, to pay a premium for it, so long that she views it as effective. And that's really going to be, the key here as we talk about all of the behavior. A product has to be effective. She will be loyal to a brand for a long time, but if she can find another one that provides her with a new experience or a new level of efficacy, she will move. But price generally does not affect her if it's bringing innovation to her makeup bag, or a good feeling and a confident feeling. I'll also add in here, Kurt, that the heavy cosmetic buyer is definitely buying multiple brands. She can't help herself. She loves makeup. She loves innovation. She's incredibly passionate about it. One or two brands in her life is way too limiting. She'd be depriving herself of fun and really the rise of confidence that looking good gives her. Exploration, experience, I think are truly a passion for this buyer. But again, keeping in mind that she'll only buy when she feels like something is going to work better for her, and that covers across mass, specialty, prestige. She really holds them all equally responsible. I will also say here that I'm a bit surprised by the number on the online reviews because, and I'm sure, Kurt, you're going to keep a good eye on this number. It's going to grow, and we've seen as many as 2/3 of heavy buyers at Sephora influenced by reviews, and more than half at mass and drug channels, particularly Ulta. And as Amazon continues to build its position in beauty, I'm sure we're going to see that number grow even further. And
yeah, and actually that is a good segue into the next slide, of course. So we are breaking it out light, medium, and heavy, and here's that number. I think you were, not your specific research, but I mean half of the heavy buyers, and this is where 60% or more of the volume's coming from, are influenced by reviews. They, meaningful number, a high number, and what, as Andrea mentioned, we expect that to grow, or researching before trying. They're just really, really engaged in this category. And you actually see this correlation between the heavier the buyer, the more they're engaged in deals. But we actually, and I didn't show it this year, but last year we did see that women that are exclusively specialty oriented, that number's in the 20s, or really low. I mean, so they'll have none of it, and that absolutely corroborates what you're saying. The brands and the products trump the deals. It is a very mass market phenomenon, and to the extent that there's women that buy in dual channels, the deals often have the allure of pulling them, a bit more of their share of purchases into the mass market versus the specialty. But even as a couple other points to bring up is that the beauty advisor, even among the heavy buyers, that's a very low number. Now, I think, Andrea, you had, we were talking about Sephora and Ulta have a different model, correct, on how the beauty advisors work?
Yeah, and I would say, I totally agree with you on the beauty advisors at the, the mass channel. They never really took off. The environment was, a bit too sterile. It didn't invite playfulness or like the colorful playground, right, that Ulta or Sephora offers. And I think the key there, too, is that when you walk into a Sephora store, those beauty advisors share the passion that the millennial buyer has for cosmetics in particular. They're peers. They're all playing. They're digging into the foundations or whatever, and they're having fun with it. So it's a totally different experience than the beauty advisor program that was launched at Mass. Very, very different. So, I'd like to say they brilliantly lifted the glass off the counter and let consumers indulge in their own way on their own time.
Okay, and then tell us about social media, won't you?
Sure thing. So I think we can all, see in how we behave that social engagement and influence continues to grow every day. And social platforms keep getting bigger and bigger. Having launched their ad platform not even 18 months ago, Snapchat, or Snap Inc. filed for their IPO today at a valuation of minimally $25 billion. And, guys, they're going to do $360 million this year, and they're projected to do about triple that next year. So this is all driven by where the millennials and Gen Z are choosing to spend their time and will in the future. So, today where consumers go to learn about new products in general is largely driven by Facebook, due mostly to their first to market position and sheer scale. They're the biggest, and they were there first. This is followed by YouTube and Instagram for Gen Z and millennials, and YouTube and Pinterest for Gen X and boomers. And because of sheer size, Facebook remains the #1 social source to learn about new products. But I think it's really important to note that the #1 most trusted source of information is beauty professionals to the heavy beauty buyer. And these are in-store advisors and influencers, so stylists, dermatologists, makeup artists, bloggers. And sometimes these overlap, right? So an in-store advisor, for example, could be an online influencer or blogger. So there's a lot of gray in all of this. So beauty content on YouTube grew over 50% in the last year, with 1.8 million beauty videos uploaded, and that has attracted over 45 billion views. Just staggering numbers. Beauty videos are generating the most views, are user-generated versus brand. And the heavy beauty buyer loves and thirsts for that fun and authenticity, which is likely the reason, Kurt, here for the 25% growth in purchase decision influence this year. So, again, going back to beyond Facebook, YouTube is really driving the influence. Also to note the growth of Instagram this year. Instagram has become the darling of the beauty category. They're up 20%. They have 67 million users overall. Their active users are heavily driven by millennials, and this is her personal entertainment and exploration platform, right, that she curates for her own. She engages with beautiful visuals. If you think about it, that's akin to, like what we would normally see traditionally in magazines. And now she can watch quick tutorial videos through Instagram stories to give herself an immersive brand experience. So this is all on her own time. And with that, now there are the shoppable links, right, that are launching through Instagram. So Instagram's on a mission to prove out that they can drive sales. They haven't been able to do that to date, in any meaningful way. They've had a number of third parties associated with it, but they're driving all engagement, no sales. Facebook has been driving meaningful sales, in the most meaningful sales in social to date. So, Kurt, I would probably predict that your online sales number for 2017 is going to grow significantly as we all embrace social buying through social.
The one thing, a couple of things, I just was interested to see how Twitter is the only platform to decline, and that's consistent with their general, general weakness, corporately. But I've always, and I'm a heavy Twitter user, but I always felt it was somewhat of a pithocracy, meaning, the status and following accrues to those that have the highest ability to come up with pithy and humorous little comments, which unfortunately I usually don't. So we've had that issue there.
Look, it's an Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube world. I mean, I look at those as Indie Nation, where the coolest brands and the coolest kids on the block, play and get noticed. You know, the scale and engagement of those platforms are really where brand awareness begins today in beauty, and where influencers of every shape and form are. And that's a whole nother, you know, topic of its own. But, you know, everybody wants to be the next Too Faced or Becca or NYX. But with more frequent, you know, algorithm changes, walled gardens, pay-to-play environments, the days of free enterprise in that way are fading, and, you know, tech advancements becoming that much more fragmented. So, you know, for a beauty brand on Twitter, I say no. I would suggest to all brands that you keep a really strong focus on where your consumer is. She may not be on Snapchat, right? Just because Snapchat is the next, you know, big thing, right? Well, so was Vine a year ago, and now Vine is dead. So was Periscope, and now Periscope is, you know, nearly dead. So, you know, don't just go where, you know, the next great technology is. You have to stay in touch with where your consumer is.
So it can't be overstated how important, you know, and how getting the information from social media kind of defines that line of demarcation between younger women and older women. And so now, Andrea, you can drive, you have control of the mouse if you want to, you know, take us home.
Yeah, sure. You know, yeah, the one thing I will say just on social again is that, you know, if you think about it, again, the visual effectiveness of the how-to makeup demonstration by the girl next door, that's incredibly powerful. And that transformation, right, that any woman can see truly empowers millions of women to feel that they can achieve that look too. And, you know, I would just continue to use the word empowering, because I think that that's what is really driving this change in the market. You know, if you think about contouring, draping, strobing, baking, color correcting, all of those trends that came out, they were all fueled by millennial engagement of bloggers and YouTube influencers. You know, they created real life, on-demand, infomercial-like reviews and experiences, you know, without ever you know, pressuring anyone to click to buy. And I think that that's made a tremendous impact on, you know, the key influencers today in beauty. So this next slide, the retail store shopper, is one of my favorite slides, I have to say. This is a breakdown of buyer behavior across department stores, Sephora, Ulta, and mass channel. And, you know, I feel like we've covered a good part of this, but, you know, the key takeaway here is that millennials embrace Sephora like no other group. And, you know, women 35 plus are continuing to mix with the mass and class approach. And top sources of information for these channels are overwhelmingly consistent with online reviews and word of mouth from family and friends. And the net here is that if a product delivers on the promise that that beauty consumer is led to believe is a reality, then she will transact. If not, she moves on to something that will, and she will not look back. There are so many choices today. So authenticity and transparency are really critical. And, you know, brands, as much as they have to inspire, most importantly, they really have to work. Yeah, sorry guys, this is a slow process. So, you know, when we think about who this buyer really is, you know, she's a woman who sees beauty as a want to have rather than a have to have. She has a clear passion for all things beauty, whether mass or prestige, and she looks for the most effective product. She loves to try and experiment. She spent as much as she possibly can afford on beauty. And while she does have a few favorite brands, she really is only loyal until something better comes along. And I know firsthand how many women in my office would spend every last dollar on their paycheck at Sephora if they didn't have to, you know, eat to survive. The average beauty shopper is getting information from 6 different sources, which frankly that varies according to the type of beauty product that we're talking about. There's so much fragmentation here. Beauty professionals and online reviews are the greatest overall influencers. We talk a lot about social media, but there's a good segment of the market that's still not influenced by social. Definitely the millennials. Everybody else not quite there yet. 86% of all women notice trends in beauty. More than half actively seek information about that trend. You know, look, there's never been a more exciting time for beauty. There's never been more consumption. Beauty is the fastest growing industry over the last 5 years, adding $1 billion a year. It's staggering. It's super exciting, right? So this is one of my favorite slides. Decisions are made differently depending on the channel she shops. Given the heavy millennial buyer at Sephora, it's no surprise that she's influenced by YouTube, by bloggers she follows closely, and the in-store advisors that embrace and share a passion, right, to play and to explore. She's greatly influenced by group chatter about her brand, and she celebrates her purchases with the world. She wants everyone to know what she just bought. The department store buyer tends to be more traditional in what influences her decisions. Her trusted magazine editors, you know, who honestly were the original influencers of this generation of shoppers, and in-store signage, right? So she's completely influenced by that, you know, special offer or that gift with purchase when she walks into that store. She's driving to one counter, but an offer on a sign could drive her to another. So she's focused on efficacy and, you know, deals and special offers. And then over to the mass and drug buyer who, you know, loves beauty too, but she has other priorities, you know, that she also has to deal with in life, and she prefers to be a bit more internally active, I would say, in her approach to researching and deciding what to buy. And she's also driven to making decisions at the shelf by deals and offers. So, you know, I think I covered off on this. I want to have enough time, Kurt, for us to be able to get to questions, but, you know, she's a beauty junkie, right? She's just spending as much as she possibly can. It's mass and class, and you know, she's driving all the fragmentation, I would say, of purchasing in the marketplace.
Well, it's also, I talked quite a few times during the presentation on corroborating, you know, things that we find with other sources. So it's always good to have multiple sources, you know, pretty much aligning, and then, you know, we can be more confident in the decisions we make and the actions we take to support the business and support our brands. So what's all this talking to us about, and what is it that we should take away? Well, first of all, we find a category that continues to be very robust. Talked times in the past and in, you know, various media. There's this macro shift going on between fashion and beauty. Basically, you're seeing across-the-board weakness going on with apparel. And a lot of that sense of indulgence and engagement, you know, particularly again for millennials, is coming in the form of beauty. And we see it in how women buy so many types, so many brands. That heavy user is buying on average 9 brands and 12 or 13 different types of cosmetics, and about half that on skincare. And it's millennials and Hispanics fueling the category growth. And skincare is very similar to cosmetics. We've spent most of the time talking cosmetics, but you should really think about skincare in the same space, except it's a bit more mass market oriented, but it still has a very, very big business. Well over 40% of its sales are going on in specialties, so that's not to minimize the importance of indulgence and premium, and all of those things we've talked about cosmetics apply to skincare as well. And it still skews to millennials and Hispanics, still a lot of brands known about and bought. The big thing with respect to brands is how those secondary brands are really posting these big awareness gains and driving growth. Talked about the growth drivers at Walmart specifically, brands like Milani, like Elf, like NYX. But the legacy brands still remaining solid. It's not as if they've raised the white flag or kind of paralyzed by indecision on what to do. They still have a very solid business. Their appeal does go across all age groups. Obviously, it's a bit stronger with older women, but it's not as if they're wildly unpopular with younger women. That's why they're mass market brands. They appeal to many, many different groups. The cosmetic, as I mentioned, shift in sales toward Walmart's driven by brand-specific decisions. Online reemerged as a real force here. Now, there's a difference between getting information online and purchasing online. And while we do expect it to continue to grow, their barrier on beauty being huge and online would be the fact that women like to indulge and engage and try and test. By definition, online doesn't afford that. Even if you get a virtual reality technology that comes on the market, you're not going to be able to replicate that. So there's going to be a cap. We haven't hit it yet, but it's not, I'd be really shocked if it ever got to be 20% of sales, but certainly right now at 10, there's a lot of upside for that channel. We're evidence that the beauty advisor model is becoming obsolete, and that model is the one I'm saying by department stores where they're really there to just kind of shill their products and give you a makeover. Whereas Ulta and Sephora, I think they really, as Andrea mentioned, really do take the role of quote advisor a bit more seriously. But really the new advisors are the YouTube personalities and the beauty bloggers. That's where a lot of the advice now is coming from the younger millennials. Social media, as we talked about, hugely important. Over half now are engaged in social media, and offering good deals, still at the top of the list for driving preference. It's a very mass market oriented preference, but that said, there's a very high percentage of buyers, and particularly heavy buyers, that shop at dual channels. And that the importance of deals is correlated with category involvement. Let me just talk to you about a follow-up analysis offer. So as I said, there's just tons and tons of information that you get from these surveys. You need 20 hours to cover everything of relevance. But for brand reviews, product type reviews, if you're in nail care and you want to review, or if you have a specific brand that you want to know about, or if you want a custom deep dive, or if you want a retailer review, we're talking a nominal cost, and it really is information, particularly if you're from a retailer orientation. That's not something your retailer is typically going to see, because we have, as we saw, all those competitors we would be able to provide. So what's the outlet share for millennials, or what's the outlet share for people in the Northeast? Those types of ways we can slice the data. So thank you everybody for attending. Hopefully you found this valuable, and again, thanks for Andrea, your participation, and now I'm going to toss it back to Dustin and he'll open it up for questions.
All right, thanks, Kurt. As I said earlier, down on the bottom right side of the screen, we have a question box that you could submit, and we do have a few questions right now.